Rob's session engineering for another bit of the R1 project, and it's quite an important day because the bike is actually off the bench, which means I can go and ride it. The only thing I need to do before that is do some suspension setup. Luckily today, I actually have a friend. Yay! The three items that I'm going to set at both ends of the bike today are the sag by setting the preload, the rebound damping and the compression damping. Now, you will have noticed the bike is on a front paddock stand today because it's an easy way to get this full length fork measurement here because the front wheel is off the floor. You can rotate the bike over on its side stand, and we will be doing that later when we do the rear, but to do a front easily, I've got it off the stand, off the floor, on the stand. Makes sense to me. So, to adjust preload, we're going to be adjusting these big nuts at the top of the fork leg, and they add more pressure onto the spring, or less if we take it off, and that pushes the bike up and down on its suspension. To affect the rebound damping, we're using the little 3mm Allen key bit in the top of there, and when we do the compression damping adjustment, we're doing the little damping screw down here. Should be fairly straightforward. At the back of the bike, ignoring the red sprocket, we will be taking a measurement between the wheel spindle and a point pretty much straight up on the seat unit, and that's going to give us a measurement that we can check for our sag. To adjust the sag, again, we're going to be changing preload, but on the back we're doing it with this remote preload adjuster. This is a hydraulic one, so we don't have to faff around with C-spanners. Then the rebound adjuster is in the bottom of the shock and slightly awkward to get to, and you know I'm going to end up covering my hand in chain lube, but the compression damping adjuster is at the top of the shock up here, so that one's nice and simple. So I suppose we ought to start taking some measurements. So the first thing I need to know is a fully extended measurement for the forks, because the sag is how much it sags down on its springs. So I have my trusted rule, and it is a rule, not a ruler. The Queen is a ruler, this is a rule. And from the dust seal to the fork bottom there, we've got 126mm. That's nice and easy to remember, but I am going to write it down. So to measure the front sag, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get on the bike and let the suspension sag. And then Adam is going to take a measurement in here. And the difference between its sagged measurement and its fully extended measurement is the sag, and we can adjust it by putting more or less preload on the spring. The only slight oddity is we're actually going to take two measurements. I'm going to get on the bike really gently so that it pushes down on the spring, and that gives us one measurement. And then I'm going to go bouncy bouncy, and the bike will go push down on its spring and come back. And the difference between the two settings gives us a stiction amount, and then the actual sag's in the middle of the two. So first measurement, I'm going to get on the bike nice and gently, going to get as much of my weight in a fairly normal riding position as I can, but on tiptoes. And then Adam's just going to take a setting and see how far the suspension has sagged. $98mm. So that is a sag of 28mm. The next measurement, I'm going to bounce me down the suspension and try and keep some weight on the front of the bike so that we're measuring the sag when it's come back up. And this will give us a stiction amount, how much the fork sticks on its way up and down. 88. Cool.
Yeah, 88.
88. So we've got 10mm stiction, which is at the higher end of what you'd expect, but you know, they're never perfect. And so that gives us in total a sag measurement of 38, 28, in the middle, 33mm. So that's 33mm of sag. I actually would really like 35mm of sag, so I'm going to take 2mm of preload off. So on the majority of forks, a turn of preload is a millimetre. So I have a socket on an extension so I don't hit the windscreen with it. And I'm going to go 1, 2. and then the other side, 1, 2. So that should give us a 35mm average sag. So I better do some more checks and see what we got now. Right, so I'm going to start with the gently measurement first and see where we're at now we've changed the preload 2mm. Just make sure the bite's nicely extended.
$113.
113?
No, 96.
Oh. Right, we'll try the bouncy bouncy.
And that is 85.
85, so yeah, that's near enough. We've actually sort of moved 1.5mm as opposed to the 2mm we were looking for. So yeah, we're now at 34.5mm. And to be honest, if we're aiming for 35, I'll settle at 34.5. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do some push tests on the forks and set the rebound and the compression damping. So for these tests, what I'm doing is I'm setting the bypass screws that let the oil pass the damping valves. So I'm going to push on the forks and I want to feel how easily the forks move down and how quickly they come back. Now that to me, it moves down quite nicely, about the right rate I'm looking for, but it comes back a little bit slow. On track, that'd actually probably be almost perfect, but on the road, I like it to recover a little bit quicker from the bumps. So I'm just going to take a few clicks of rebound damping out of it to see if I can make the forks recover quicker out the bumps. Thank you. So we're currently at 12 clicks. 12, 15, 16. 12. So it's not a massive difference, but the fork is coming back a little bit quicker. And that's actually, for me, feeling pretty good for road use. What I might do as a bit of a demonstration is just wind the damper all the way in so you can see how much difference they can make. Now, I've wound the dampers all the way in, and on these forks, as with the majority of forks, the rebound adjuster actually affects the compression as well because it opens a bypass on the damper rod and it actually lets oil flow both ways. So this should make quite a big difference. And it does because the forks barely move. And I've heard lots of people saying, especially on sports bikes, that the bike should be hard. Well, it shouldn't, because the suspension still needs to go over the same bumps. And if you rode that on the road, that would be horrendous. On track, it wouldn't be nice. Oh, that would be horrendous on the road, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going back to the settings I had beforehand. So you bottom the adjuster into the damper, only gently. The first click you feel coming out is 0. 0. So we're now back out to the 16 clicks. And look how easily it moves, down and back up. So that's much better. It's actually, if anything, a little bit on the soft side now, but I'm happy that the rebound's where I want it. So what I might do next is play around with the compression adjuster. The compression adjuster is much more independent than the rebound, so this should only make the forks considerably harder coming down. So what I'll do to begin with again is I'll wind them all the way in and see what it feels like. We're currently at 18 clicks out. That's the adjuster's wound all the way in. Let's see what difference it makes. And as you can see, it's quite a lot of difference. the forks are very, very hard to push down, but they do actually come back at a reasonable rate. Not that you can tell because they haven't moved very far. But if I'm honest, that would be horrendous to ride on as well. So you can imagine if you wound all the adjusters in all the way to make your ride nice and hard, it would actually be very unpleasant. So sometimes having it hard isn't good. So to me, the previous setting was actually a little bit soft in compression. So we were at 18, I'm going to come out to, I think, 14 and see what it feels like. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here we go on the new compression setting. And that is considerably better. It's got enough support to hold the bike so when we hit the brakes it doesn't just dive onto the floor, but it's soft enough that it should absorb the bumps nicely. So I think that's a good setting for the forks. We better move on to the back end. So to measure the sag at the back of the bike, we need a measurement between somewhere near the wheel spindle and somewhere on the seat unit. The exact points don't really matter as long as you use the same points each time. And again, the first thing we need to have is a fully extended measurement. So I'm going to lean the bike over on its side stand a little bit, and Adam is going to pick a point on the seat unit to take the measurement from. So what we're going to do here is I'm just going to pivot the bike over on its side stand a little bit to bring the back wheel off the floor, and Adam's going to give me a measurement from his chosen points.
That's 22 inches.
Inches? I like to work in millimetres.
I work in inches.
So, in millimetres...
that is 565 mil.
565 mil. So the next measurement we're going to take is a loaded up sag measurement. Normally I don't do a stiction measurement on the rear shock because on the forks, the weight of the bike is trying to sort of bend the fork, so you always get a little bit of drag from the slides. But on the rear shock, the weight is actually going up and down, so you should have considerably less stiction. But I want to actually double check that theory. So the first thing I'm going to do is get on the bike and get on it very gently and see what the measurement is. Then we'll do the bouncy later. So, nice high measurement. We're going to get on up. Gently.
530.
530 mil, so 35 millimetres of sag. So now we'll try it with the bouncy and see if it makes any difference.
530.
530. So, as I suspected, there isn't really a stiction problem in the rear shock. And what we've actually got there is 35 millimetres of sag, which is absolutely spot on what I wanted to get. But just for the sake of the camera, we will actually show you what the adjustment difference will make. So what I'm actually trying here is I've actually taken all of the preload off the hydraulic adjuster, and I want to see how much difference it makes. I've taken 5mm of preload off the shock, but it makes more than 5mm at the seat unit because you've got a shock and a linkage and a load ratio. So I'm going to sit on it again and we'll see what we've won.
520.
Excellent, so that sort of goes to prove that taking 5mm of preload off the shock has actually made 10mm of difference in the back of the bike, which is about right. I'd normally expect about 2 to 3 times multiplication on that, but I'm going to put my 5 turns back on and then we'll do some push tests at the back of the bike. So the next thing I'm going to do is just do some push tests a bit like we did on the front. Adam's just supporting the bike upright, so I'm going to find a solid piece where we're near some mounting points, give it a good shove. And as you can see, that's pretty good already because we've got a nice controlled movement down and up. Again, if anything, we're a little bit on the soft side. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to wind the adjusters all the way in and see what difference that makes. So, starting with the rebound adjuster, again, like the forks, it does make an effect on the compression as well, and I've wound it all the way in. It doesn't go as solid as the forks, but you can imagine it would be little unpleasant because it'd be fairly hard. One of the big problems, especially if you've got too much rebound damping, is as you go over bumps, the bike sort of packs down, and then after a few bumps, the bike sort of sits like this and it doesn't want to steer properly, and then each bump makes it feel even harder, so you don't want too much rebound damping. But we were a little bit soft to begin with, so we were at 12 clicks, so I'm going to come out to, I think 8, and see what it feels like. So I'm now 8 clicks out from fully in on the rebound adjuster. And we've got a nice controlled movement coming back up, maybe a little bit soft still on compression. So what I'm going to try is wind the compression adjuster all the way and see what difference that makes. Right, so with the compression wound all the way in, again, doesn't make as much difference with the forks, but it is definitely firmer to push down. But it still recovers fairly well. So again, I'm going to go, I think, to 8 clicks, like I had on the rebound damping, see what it feels like. So all the way in, 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that to me is about spot on. We've got nice control to it. It's not too hard, so it should go over the bumps nicely, but it should sort of deal with the load of the bike through the corners and stuff fairly well. So I think that's job done, which only means one thing now. Let's go riding! Yes! I really like rebuilding bikes and doing a little bit of restoration, getting the bike looking really nice and sort of giving it a second lease of life. But the best thing about building bikes, of course, is actually going and riding them. So with a full tank of fuel, the first few miles are fairly steady down some fairly straight roads. This gives us a reasonable opportunity to just get used to the throttle connection and get used to the drive from the engine. Coming out of 40-mile-an-hour speed limits, for example, in top gear, you open the throttle, there's just that tiny little lag as it begins to breathe, and then you get a really smooth, constant drive. Just a real good push right from low in the rev range until almost hitting the speed limit. You have to be a little bit careful because even though it's not particularly new, these bikes are still fast. Then before long it's time to turn off onto a nice twisty road, but I'm a little bit cautious because although the tyres are brand new, they were brand new 5 years ago, so I am giving them plenty of time to scrub in. Before long though I do actually start noticing there's a distinct judder from the front brake. Whether it's a slightly warped disc or there's been something spilt on it that I've not noticed, it's just not very good and it's giving me a little bit of an arm massage that I don't really want. But with the tyres bedding in a little bit, I can get it nice and flowing down some twisty bits of road. Then you start to notice the bump absorption on the suspension and the stability of the chassis are really good, but the actual turn rate, the way the bike steers into corners, isn't particularly fast. I mean, this should be a geometry thing, and we do have options for ride height adjustment and dropping forks through, so it's not a big problem. But then, after a few miles, Adam was signalling that he wanted to pull over. So Adam, you keep complaining that I've done some mischief to you. What's occurred?
I think it's GBH.
Is it?
Yes. No. ABH. Because as we were riding along, and then you kind of went, oh, national speed limit, off we go. This little black thing shot from the back of your bike and hit me square in the nipple. And it hurts like fuck still. It's been about 5 minutes. It's like I've been shot.
So it is in fact gravel bodily harm?
Yes. Yeah. I like it.
Oh, brilliant.
Can you kiss it better?
No.
Oh.
No.
Okay.
Once Adam had had enough of standing in a lay-by and rubbing his nipple, it was time to get going again and sort of point back towards the workshop. Through villages and stuff, the bike's really good, it's lovely and smooth, it's quite comfortable, and then the best thing is you get to the end of the speed limit sign, and you pin it, and it is quick. It might be 23 years old, but this bike is still fast. The brakes, on the other hand, are quite terrible and definitely need some attention very quickly. The chassis is pretty good, the bump absorption, the actual ride quality is lovely. It just could do with steering a little bit faster, but I will be making some adjustments to that. So all in, for a first test ride, it's been pretty good. Most importantly, nothing's fallen off. Right, so we've done about 50-ish miles on a selection of different roads, and there are certain things to report back. The bad thing is the front brake, because it's horrendous. You pull it and it just judders a lot, and then you don't want to pull it any harder, so you don't slow down as much as you want, so then you have to be a bit sort of careful where you're riding, because you can't just go charging into stuff. I'm not sure whether it's a disc warped or a disc that's got a load of corrosion on it or something that I've not picked up on previously, but either way it is going to have to get sorted. That is top of the priority list. Other than that, when you sort of shut it off just into junctions and bits, it holds onto its revs a little bit. I think that's probably a carburettor setting, sort of an air screw setting or something, so hopefully that'll be fairly easy to sort. I might sharpen up the steering a little bit. It doesn't actually turn in, its initial turn in isn't particularly quick, and it's really stable so far, so what I might do is either add a little bit of ride height to the back of the bike, because we have a ride height adjuster, or drop the fork through a little bit, and that'll just shorten the trail a little bit and just help the bike turn quicker. So there are a few little bits to do a bit of attention. The good things though, the engine is lovely. When you sort of crack the throttle open, and it's so smooth and rich in the way that only really carburettors can do, and it just drives forwards. And okay, it's not as fast as a new BMW, but it is by no means a slow motorbike. This is still fast. It's really smooth, it's nice and torquey. The gearbox is pretty good. It's not the smoothest I've ever used, but it's not bad at all. The suspension action is actually really nice as well. Over the bumps, its actual bump absorption is really good for race-derived suspension. It's sort of almost its standout feature, and it behaves well, it holds lines and stuff. Once I've just got that initial turning sorted, we'll be winning. So yeah, little list of jobs to do. Brakes, just a little bit of carburetor adjustment. Oh, and the temp gauge has still got a mind of its own, but nothing major. So that's happy enough for the first ride. Just a few little bits to sort. So join me again next time when we'll be sorting little bits.